Welcome, Adam. So thank you so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about your work and about how you got involved in what you're doing, why you do it, and just to share with the folks that are going to be looking at the exhibit. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation and for supporting the arts, even in this difficult time where we can't be together physically. I think it's great that you're reaching out and using this medium to connect people, and I'm honored to be involved. Thank you.
So, Adam, I'm really captivated by the depth of the representation of nature that you provide in your work. And I was particularly taken with your pond series. And I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about how you came to focus on that kind of work?
Sure. Yeah, the Pond series was a group of 70 paintings I did a couple of years ago in one location. And that was the series I did just before the Big Oak series, which are some of the paintings that are behind me in my studio here and featured in the show. And they share some things in common. When I think about the work of art, I think about practice and creating objects, the actual painting. A work of art is an object, but it's also a practice. And this kind of work for me as a practice is really a call to be fully present and go into some depth, which is interesting to me. I was a landscape painter doing plein air painting for a long time and would often do a painting in 3 hours or even less and then move on to another location. And I found as the years went by, I was more and more interested in a depth kind of practice where I'm going through a lot with the piece, and the piece is giving evidence to this journey. And so the kind of painting I'm doing, I think of as a kind of a practice that's both the self, but it's also ascending self. And it's a sort of a student practice. I think I'm most comfortable thinking of myself as a student and seeing these trees or a certain place in nature as being the teacher, as being the source of wisdom. And so sitting at the feet of my teacher and becoming still and observing is fits my character and my interests. And then as far as the object, it's a piece of art, and it's an object that is a painting. It's located in a European tradition of painting. I'm very interested in late 19th century paintings of trees, Rousseau and Courbet and George Inness, kind of painters who were painting within a movement that was referred to as realism at that time, much different from photorealism. And was really a kind of almost a conservation-minded movement. And if you bring that together with portraiture, which is what I studied in Italy, I had quite a rigorous training in Florence, Italy for a couple of years, studying this thing called sight size, which is painting directly from nature. And that tradition, which is really a portrait tradition, sort of comes together with this realist tradition of tree painting, and I end up with these tree portraits that you can kind of locate art historically if you're into that sort of thing, and that's fascinating as well. So
we spoke earlier, and you mentioned, that you feel that you have no choice but to paint nature. And just now you've said that, this is a personal preference for you to be in this mode, this mode of perception. And I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit more about what that is so appealing to you?
Sure. Well, the word relationship comes to mind, and for me, the fact of our being a part of nature as opposed to apart from it. As an ecologist, for many years, I've lived at an art and ecology center and studied permaculture and ecology. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm very interested in relationship. And ecology could be described as the study of relationships. And if you look at your capacity, our capacity, or personally my capacity to come into relationship with some part of nature, whether it's a tree or a pond, um, it becomes kind of a microcosm of all of nature, and it becomes a journey into a sort of belonging, or sort of a partness, of the whole kind of great circle of life. Not to be
Mhm,
too grandiose, but
mhm,
it's a little bit of that anyway. And that's something that I treasure, I value.
mhm,
And so this kind of painting, is a kind of both looking in and looking out, and seeing, I think, if you're quiet enough and perseverant, patient enough, at a certain point, looking in and looking out becomes almost the same. Which is what I meant when I think I said to you earlier, hey, I have no choice but to paint nature. Whether you're
right,
painting your inner or your outer, you're painting nature. And if you weave the two together, it's a relational kind of a field. And
mhm,
and one of the things about these big oak trees that's just so thrilling is how they speak of relationship in all these different ways. I mean, relationship to place, relationship to climate and the water, and you could go on and on talking about
mhm.
trees all day.
I wonder about um, repetition. And I know the Pond series, you did 70 paintings of the same scene, the same location. And with your trees, you're now, I think, doing something that you're defining as closer to portraiture in terms of using particular trees. Um, and yet I can see three pieces behind you, and they all have a lot of similarities in terms of the composition. And so can you talk a little bit about what repetition means to you and how you use that in your work?
Sure. It's an interesting question. There, it feels like there's a lot there. A couple of things to say. One is, I think repetition is a myth. That in fact there is no repetition, and it's a construct. The idea of repetition. Even snowflakes are not repetitive.
Right.
uh, Even snowflakes.
Yeah.
So when you think about the act of trudging out to a pond, and painting a tree next to a bit of water, that is really completely original, every single time you do it, because everything's dynamic and everything's changing. And I guess a cliche is the only thing that doesn't change is change. And so the the myth of repetition, the myth of drudgery, um, which I think in many spiritual traditions we talk about this. The Buddha ends up uh, pushing a raft across a river back and forth, and it's not what you do, it's how you do it. So this whole idea of repeating something so many times that you realize it's not repetition is is interesting to me. And then the other thing to say about the repetition of a series, when you set parameters like scale, subject, composition, materials, even maybe duration of time, it's sort of like a great marriage where there are parameters within which that relationship is going to remain, and it allows a kind of a depth and a free expression, which a relationship without any parameters maybe wouldn't allow, because we have to be more cautious and careful.
Yeah.
And when you have all these limitations, it's a paradox. You become less limited, and and then one of the things about a series is that it allows stylistic variation, in a way that painting one painting after another, to me, doesn't. So
And you do get to access the variation itself
yeah.
and the dynamism of that.
As long as, I mean, in this case, these paintings are 4 by 6 feet, and so they're big and they're very, very different, each one from the other. But just the fact that they're the same size and the same basic subject makes them hold together with much more diversity of treatment and handling. And I think there's an exciting tension there.
How do you think about the viewer the people that are looking at your pictures and their role, not that, I mean, you've talked very much about your experience of being in the world, being in nature, being in your life, and painting. What kind of role do they have? How do they get to step into relationship? How do you think about that?
Well, the viewer plays many roles. Certainly, on a sort of almost spiritual level, the viewer completes the circle. There's a sense of almost being, something's created, and then it's seen by someone else. It's taken into somebody else's consciousness, their heart, their soul, themselves, and there's a completeness about that circle. It is the viewer's in relationship through with me, with the work, with the tree, is part of that web and makes a contribution to that web. Simply, the viewer also supports the work. You can't make work like this in a void unless you just are endlessly wealthy and enabled to do it. But I'm not sure why anyone would make this kind of work and keep it hidden away. I think the capacity of this work to operate in a space decoratively is something that I'm happy about and interested in. I'm not afraid of the word decoration. I think that bringing beauty into our healing and nourishing and important. So it works that way. The viewer is a consumer in a sense of the work. And then maybe, I mean, if I could dare to hope a few things about the viewer, which everybody's experience of the work is very different. But I would hope, since I've been so nourished and expanded by my relationship with trees, that the viewer could receive evidence of that kind of relationship that they maybe don't have yet or haven't sought out, and become curious about it. Maybe even to the point of trying it out, getting more friendly with a tree, maybe something that you live near or even live with, and benefit in that way from all of the extraordinary, I mean, really amazing wonders that the tree possesses, and it is very healing too.
Mm-hmm. I think about one of these trees being on the wall in a public space that people come to. It might be a space they come back to multiple times because they have business in that location, or they're coming for some kind of service, and it becomes part of their personal landscape in a way that is meaningful and does allow them to have a relationship with a tree in Sebastopol, or in a place that they wouldn't be. There aren't trees like that in their area, perhaps, but it really does give them an expanded window on nature.
Yeah, and something that we haven't brought up about these great California oak trees is that they're quite endangered, and they've been dying by the tens of thousands from sudden oak death in the last 10, 15 years. And many of these trees are becoming, I mean, if not extinct, but very, very difficult to find and forge a relationship with. And so there's also this kind of poignant dimension of painting these magnificent creatures as they pass away, originally anyway. And so they become a kind of a memory aid, or honoring the spirit of these trees. When I moved to West Sonoma County 26 years ago, they were everywhere. I mean, on the land that I've got the privilege of living on, there were at least a dozen very big old trees, hundreds of years old, and they're all gone. They're all dead in such a short time.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder of these things that we think are so enduring, that they are not always.
Temporally, you are locating yourself by documenting the lives of these trees now, and that may be very different in the future. And in fact, a tree that you paint 10 years from now may have some different characteristics than a tree you're painting this year or that you might have painted in the past.
That's right. And you know, the trees, each tree tells a story. It tells many stories. It tells stories of the weather and the forest around, and the changes and the soil and the water, and all of these stories are built into the very structure of the tree, the architecture of the tree. And
Yeah.
the storytelling and receiving that I do with a tree then is woven into the painting.
Mhm.
And it's kind of captured there, frozen there. It's like a drop of amber, you know. And that tree story is being told if you look deep enough, right? If you take that time.
Well, I'm glad that I've taken the time, and I'm glad that the viewers coming to watch this will get to see that as well and hear the stories that you've brought to us from the trees. Thank you so much, Adam, for your work and for our conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.